Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to do another episode of Movie Spotlight. And today we're going to go kind of a little bit way back. We're going to go back to the 50s, and one of my favorite giant monster films, and that is 1954's Them. Um, Now this movie was released at kind of the height of the radioactive, monster movie culture in probably the mid to late 50s. It actually kind of stretches back to the 40s and stuff too, basically since the end of World War II. It kind of trailed off in the late 50s. But this was one of the most infamous. Well, I shouldn't say infamous. But this is one of the best ones, if not the best one. And it's basically about giant killer ants. And they're massive ants that have been mutated because of government testing in this random little town out in the desert. I believe it's New Mexico, where the town is located. It's in the desert somewhere around there. It's like New Mexico or Arizona. And basically, the reason why I love the movie isn't because I find it amusing because it's goofy, because the special effects are kind of goofy, let's be honest. I mean, viewing it from a lens of today, you look at that film and you say, oh, it looks goofy. It looks like it looks like a puppet. It looks all goofy. But that was, cutting edge at the time. So I try to watch movies from, certain time periods for the most part, thinking of what would people react to in the theaters if they saw this, somebody that wasn't from today, somebody of the time. And that's how I try to judge a film anyway. I don't take away points if a film was made in 1954 and the CGI is not so great. You know what I mean? So with them, the special effects were great in that film, again, for the time. Again, it was part of, a long string of movies like it. You had like Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. You had movies like Tarantula, which was actually aped off of later on in another movie I did on here, Eight-Legged Freaks, which was basically a spoof of that. But Them was kind of a movie where the marketing campaign was good. Again, it's just one word. It's just them. You have to see them. I always kind of loved that about the movie. It had a really good tagline to it to kind of get people in it. It's not a half bad movie in general. I mean, it's played very straight. The actors aren't over the top or cartoony or horrible. Because the other thing is, a lot of people kind of have this misconception about older films. They still made shitty older films. There are some black and white films that you can drudge up, and they are complete fucking garbage. But the thing is with a lot of the horror movies, you still had people that, not always, but sometimes you had people that they couldn't act very well, and you could tell in a lot of cases. A lot of the times it was a very two-dimensional damsel, or something along those lines, or a very wooden protagonist, or a hero in the story, or something like that. A lot of it kind of felt up to that. And some of those Atomic Monster movies, because they were like a dime a dozen, I think that was around the time when Corman was getting started too with a lot of his movies in the late 50s. But the thing is that those type of films would attract, the low budget would attract those actors that maybe weren't the best. But this movie has some relatively good acting in it. The leads are both believable. The threat that you think is believable. They obviously have all the cliches that people had back then. You have the scientist that they consult, where they have to, because they have to try and stop the ants. So he's an insect expert. So he's the brainy guy. And then you have the military guy and the local cop and the kid that sees everything and the damsel who happens, I think, to be the assistant of the scientist, which is actually pretty common. I don't believe she's his daughter. I think she's just an assistant, if I remember correctly. But there have been other ones where it's been like the daughter or the niece or something. But it's a very predictable formula in terms of that. But again, the characters aren't wooden. They're not obtuse. They don't, it doesn't feel like somebody just running in and reading their lines. It doesn't feel like the lines are sped up too fast. I know that's another thing that people like to complain about a lot with older films. So they say their dialogue very fast, so you can't really get a lot of it necessarily. And like I said, another movie I had on here, the Thing from Another World, had that issue where the dialogue was basically like overlapping, but it was very quick, so you couldn't hear anything that was really being said in some of those scenes. But this movie again doesn't really suffer from that. It's kind of it's a bit of an interesting film in the sense that it was obvious that they couldn't do certain things with it. But the substitutions are kind of brilliant. So there's actually a scene at the end of the movie where they're hunting down the ant queens, and basically they had this whole setup where they're looking for them and they can't find them, and then they track down this very slim lead, and they find out that the ants have made their colony in this like slewway system below a city, and they've started to reproduce there. Um, so they wind up going in there and finding them and getting them out. But it's an interesting alternative to going into an actual ant cave or something like that, where they'd have to pay a lot in order to do it. Instead, you can just film on a crappy little soundstage, and all the exterior shots you can just have as being in the city, and it works. But like I said, I like that. The design of the ants, I think, is particularly good, and the whole thing with them, like, oh, they have a scene where, like, oh, shoot the antenna, it can't sense you without the antenna. I don't know if that's true, by the way. That's just something that's kind of fun that's in the movie. But I like that. Like I said, I like the acting. The action in it is fairly good. Again, it's kind of one of those movies where, oh, the world is at stake. These things could destroy the world, and that kind of thing. Again, a lot of that kind of 1950s type of tone where everything or nothing, as opposed to a small little intricate story like something you'd see in the 30s and 40s. But again, I like it a lot. The soundtrack also for this movie is really, really good. I do like the dramatic soundtrack. Again, it copies a lot of elements that you see in a lot of older films, a lot of bum 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 type of stuff. But I really do enjoy the soundtrack for the film. It does build tension in the movie when it needs to build tension, and that's the other thing too, is the tension moments in the movie are actually pretty good, and I give them credit for actually bringing in real flamethrowers and lighting shit on fire, because that was pretty entertaining at various points in the film. But like I said, I really do enjoy the movie. The 1950s monster movie is something that's it's an interesting little microcosm in film, where it was a very gimmicky, it was very goofy, but people loved it. It reminds me a little bit kind of the slasher boom in the 80s, but maybe not to as extreme an extent. But I want to know what you think. Have you seen Them? Do you like that movie? Are you familiar with it at all? Do you like, any kind of those type of movies, those 1950s giant monster movies, of which, stuff like Godzilla and stuff came out of that as well. Stuff like the Japanese kaiju stuff and all that stuff. That all kind of sprung from that nuclear stuff from the 50s from American films and stuff. So that's kind of an interesting way to go about it. But I want to know what you think. Do you like movies like that? Do you not like movies like that? Again, put your thoughts in the comments below. I like to read them. Hit the bell for notifications. Hit the like button. Subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?